John S. Hutchins first shows up in the census in 1850, living with second wife Lydia Emmeline Lake in South Shaftesbury, Vermont, which borders White Creek, with their 3-month-old baby Leah, and a Thomas and Margaret Donahan, who had a 2-month-old daughter Sarah. The Donahans were from Ireland. There seems to be no connection except they shared a house. However, John had to have been in White Creek since at least 1847, and probably a year or two prior to that. His first wife, Lydia M. Gardner, and their month-old daughter Lydia are buried in the Center White Creek Cemetery, Old Section, Row 5. The child died March 6, 1848, at age 1 month, 10 days, and the mother March 20, 1848, age 24. That this is the same John Hutchins as then married Lydia Lake in 1849 is proven by a quitclaim deed he and Lydia Lake Hutchins signed concerning his first wife, Lydia Gardner Hutchins' inheritance from her father Ishmael Gardner. Where John came from and exactly when he came to White Creek I have been unable to determine. John S. Hutchins seems to be a common name in the Hutchins family, along with Lydia. The censuses show John was born in 1812 or 1813. He probably arrived in White Creek between 1841 and 1846. In 1850 he began to buy and sell land, so records can be found concerning that, and he and Lydia Lake show up in later censuses. His connection with the Donahans might provide a clue, as there was a John S. Hutchins of Ireland, who came down from Quebec and settled in Vermont. However, he didn't come to Quebec straight from Ireland. He lived in the Boston area first, but I haven't been able to find any evidence of a connection there either. Since we have little to go on concerning John Hutchins' ancestry and place of origin, let's look at his first wife's family. Lydia was the daughter of Ishmael Gardner and Cynthia Dyer. Ishmael in Gardner genealogies is the son of Captain Joshua Gardner and Lydia Gardner Gardner, Joshua's cousin. All are buried in the Center White Creek Cemetery. As Ishmael was supposedly born in Hancock, Massachusetts in 1789, 1773 to 1778 is a more likely date range but poses its own problem. It's likely his family didn't move until the late 1790s. According to Chrisfield Johnson's 1877 History of Washington County, Joshua came south from Argyle on March 17, 1791, and purchased David Sprague's farm. Sprague had settled in White Creek in 1771 and later moved to Argyle. Apparently the Gardners lived on the farm, probably running it from 1791 to 1794 when they bought it. Both Joshua and Ishmael's names are on the deed. But in the 1794 deed, both are listed as being of Greenwich, not Argyle, although the towns border each other. Sprague's White Creek land is noted in said History of Washington County as being about a mile west of the log church, the corner of present-day Washington County Route 68 and North Huzik Road, and near the Ovando Perry John James home, which is now September Farm. A 1799 quitclaim deed from Ishmael clarifies that he had bought this land together with Joshua, and at this time released half of it to Joshua for $3,000 cash. Since a person had to be 21 to buy and sell land, Ishmael would have had to be born in 1773 or earlier, but that would make his mother about 5 years old at his birth if he was Joshua's son. There's really something wrong here, either with his birth date or his parentage. Here is my take on the date problem. Joshua and Ishmael are mentioned in the 1794 deed as already residing in the farm. They probably had been renting it since 1791. Ishmael might have been born in 1778 or 1779 if his death date was 1835, as in the Gardner genealogy, but it actually is 1845 on the gravestone. I drove down and double-checked it. That would make his birth date 1788, plus or minus a year. Joshua was a legal purchaser on the 1794 deed, but Ephraim could have been added to ensure he got his half on his 21st birthday. This does not, however, work out with the 1799 quitclaim. When being 11, he signs half his interest over to Joshua. He would have had to be at least 21 in 1799. If he was 21, this also means that Ishmael could not be Joshua and Lydia's son. Regardless of the major dating problems with the Gardner genealogy, which is not what this video is about, what is certain is that Ishmael and Joshua bought the Sprague farm in 1794, then split it in 1799. Joshua lived there and built a brick house in the 1813 to 17 time period, making the bricks on site. The original house was moved back behind the brick one and used as a farm building. Today this is 181 Andrews Road in White Creek. Where Ishmael and Cynthia lived is uncertain. Ishmael is also recorded by Johnson as keeping the first tavern at White's Corners, or Center White Creek, but no dates are given, and I have found no deeds or records confirming this. Deeds before 1791 would be in Albany County, but I doubt any will be found that early. In 1836, Ishmael was one of 5 men appointed commissioners of the White Creek Turnpike Road Company. This was supposed to build a turnpike from Eagle Bridge to the west line of Vermont near Elias Huntington's marble quarry, north of Cross Hill Road in Shaftesbury. I suspect they were looking forward to the coming of the railroad to Eagle Bridge and planned to charge for hauling marble from the quarry to the railroad. The road was obviously never built. Railroads did come to Eagle Bridge, but were rapidly also extended to North Bennington and north. The Huntington Quarry, one of 3 in Shaftesbury, contained very low-quality marble. All 3 are mentioned in, but had been abandoned long before, the Vermont Geological Survey of 1858. Much better marble was found further north in Dorset and Rutland. To further confuse things, there is also another Ishmael N. Gardner in White Creek in the 1850s, but he was born in 1829 in Saratoga County according to the 1855 New York Census, so he would be too young to be this Ishmael. He might be his son, certainly a relative. He had been a resident of White Creek for 15 years since 1840. Ishmael died on 13 September 1845. Cynthia died in 1848. Their daughter Lydia M. Gardner married John S. Hutchins, most likely in 1847. Lydia Gardner Hutchins and their baby daughter Lydia died in 1848. John remarried to Lydia E. Lake about a year later. There are far too many people with the same names in these families. However, knowing that the Gardners moved south from the Argyle, Greenwich area, I checked for Hutchinses up there in that time period and found there were some, including a John Hutchins. He doesn't quite fit with the John Hutchins of White Creek, but anyone researching the Hutchins genealogy should do some more research on the family in that area. But as this video is already getting long, I am going to now follow along with John and Lydia Lake Hutchins and their children. Turning to John S. Hutchins, he next shows up in the 1850 census in South Shasbury, Vermont, which borders White Creek, with second wife Lydia Emmeline Lake and baby daughter Leah. In order of houses, they are listed between Elias Huntington, occupation farmer but who also owned a marble quarry, and Samuel and Edwin Cransons, who were stonecutters. This would indicate John was sharing a house with an Irish family just barely over the border from White Creek and Shasbury on Cross Hill Road or the immediate vicinity. Although no marriage record has been found, it is most likely that John remarried about a year after his first wife died, so in March of 1849. This was customary at the time, and their baby Leah was born 26 January 1850, which fits well. The census indicates that they were married more than a year previously to June 1850, which also supports this. The fact that they were sharing a house, probably rented with the Donahans, an Irish family, and that no value was listed for his land, indicates that John wasn't very well off financially prior to 1850. We have seen that Ishmael Gardner was well acquainted with Elias Huntington due to the 1836 White Creek Turnpike project, so John had a connection there, although Ishmael had died in 1845. Captain Elias Huntington died in 1854. The quarry likely closed well before 1858, according to the geological report, but in 1850 they were still carving stones there, probably gravestones. Lydia Emmeline Lake was the daughter of James Lake and Lydia Cross. James descended from the Lakes of New Jersey, who partnered with their aunt Van Corlear in the fur trade, and built the Van Corlear Lake Trading Post in 1711 on Quaker Hill, on an Indian trail long before White Creek existed. They received the 5,000-acre Van Corlear Lake patent in July of 1761. Lydia Cross would probably be a descendant of Ichabod Cross of South Shasbury, who got into a violent dispute with Samuel Gardner during the 1700s border dispute between the New Hampshire grants to New York. This dispute took place in the same area Huntingtons later lived, and Cross still lived there in 1869, according to the map. Samuel Gardner sold out to Zebulon Cornell and two others in 1794. Lydia E. Lake's sister, Mary Ann, married Slocum Wilbur, as mentioned in the previous video on the Wilbur family. James and Lydia Lake lived north of the top of Quaker Hill on a drive which no longer exists, off a road which no longer exists. The 1853 map shows where they lived in relation to the Wilburs and the Hutchins. The 1866 map gives a better picture of the roads, though different people owned some of the properties by then. Today their home site would be on the property of John Heffernan. The place that is labeled Mrs. M. Lake on the 1853 map and J. Lake on the 1866 map is the Van Corlear Lake Trading Post, which no longer stands. In 1850, while John and Lydia were living across the line in Shasbury, Ephraim Gardner's estate was settled. John inherited his first wife's share and signed a quitclaim deed to Palmer Gardner for $3,830 in cash, which would be the equivalent of about $154,000 today. Suddenly, he had nearly enough money to buy a farm of their own for himself and Lydia. 2 years later, he and Lydia bought a farm in White Creek on what is today Meeting House Road, just northeast of Quaker Hill Road. They bought it from Henry and Hannah Bovey of Hoosick for $5,000, equivalent to about $204,000 in today's money. Henry and Hannah had bought the farm 10 years earlier in 1842 from Hannah Stewart of White Creek for $45.72, which would be about $175,000 today. This farm is Elm Spring Farm today. farm was only a short distance from Lydia Lake's family home, so John got to live close to his in-laws. It originally belonged to Edward Aiken, a well-off farmer and millwright, and nominally a Quaker, who leased land to the Quakers for a meeting house at the bottom of Quaker Hill for 1 peppercorn a year, but who didn't attend due to his explosive temper. Edward eventually sold his property in the White Creek area and bought Sir William Johnson's estate in Johnstown, New York. His descendants owned that until they sold it to the state for a historical site. A year later, in 1853, the Hutchins bought another small parcel of land from Delavan Perry in the hamlet itself, across today's County Route 68 from Murphy Lane. It was 7/8 of an acre for $1,200, which would be about $49,000 today. This seems very expensive for such a small lot. A number of deeds drawn up over the next 20 years show that John was involved in some land transfers. In 1857, he sold a bit over 35 acres of land to Simeon Sweet, between the present North Hoosick Road and County Route 68 south of Nathan Harrington's. How he obtained this isn't said. It bordered on Ishmael Gardner's land, so he may have acquired it from Ishmael. At the end of 1864, John, in partnership with Stephen and George Barker, bought 1.5 acres known as the Wilkinson Tavern Stand from Hiram and Sarah Butts for $2,650, $53,000 in today's money. This is a lot where the big tavern still stands. There was a 1-rod or 16.5-foot strip along the eastern edge that was retained by the Buttses. In 1871, these three, with their wives, sold the same parcel to William Reed for $2,800, $72,000 today. In this deed, the 1-rod strip is explained as the entrance to the racetrack and was owned by Abraham Pruin. John S. Hutchins Sr. died in 1879. John and Lydia had 6 children between 1850 and 1865. Leah, born in 1850 in Vermont, married Henry Quincy Allen, the son of Jacob Quincy Allen, and Mary Wheeler in 1879. They had 2 boys, Henry Vincent Hutchins, born 1882, who married Ina Harrington, and Ernest Hutchins, born 1884, who married Florence Center. Leah died in 1907, Henry in 1945. John J., born in 1852 in White Creek, died in 1856. Henry Bovey, born in 1855 in White Creek, he married Elizabeth Bendon in 1879. They lived in Cohoes, New York, and had 3 children, Cora, Ada, and Raymond. He died in 1929. I thought here I had found a lead to John S. Hutchins' origins, as why would he name a child after a man he bought a farm from unless they were related in some way? However, it turns out that Henry wasn't named after the man who sold him the land, but after his son, Henry Jr., who had married Lydia's sister, Amity Crosslake. Henry and Amity Bovey had 2 male children in 1850 and 1852, Marion and Irvin. Both either died during childbirth or very young. The connection was Lydia's family, not John's. John S. Jr. John was born in 1857 and never appears to have married or had children. He died in 1934. Lydia was born in 1862 and died in 1864. Herbert V. was born in 1855 according to his gravestone, but several censuses put it at 1865. Unless he was a twin of Henry Bovey, it has to be 1865. He died in 1910. There isn't much other info on him. He was still living with his aged mother and brother John S. in 1905, so likely never married or had children. In 1898, John S. Hutchins Jr. was elected manager of the creamery. The election was contested. In 1900, John S. Hutchins Jr. bought a bit over 12 acres in White Creek from an Ellen Murray for $85. Just where this was, I am not sure. In 1900, the Hutchins children, Leah, John, Herbert, and Henry, and their spouses, signed a quitclaim deed in favor of Lydia Lake Hutchins for $3,600 cash, $134,600 today. Lydia now owned the farm. In 1901, Herbert Hutchins signed another quitclaim deed to Lydia for an additionally nearly 106 acres, excepting reserving access to a cemetery. I had thought this parcel included the Hutchins Cemetery, then the one across the road, but eventually I drew out the land using the Meets and Bounds program, scaled it to the same scale as the topo map, and found the only place it fit would be at the top of the hill. As one boundary ran along Warren Sweet's place, the farm I grew up on, the only cemetery in that area is the Lake Cemetery next to the trading post. Whether this plot included the trading post itself, I am not sure. But the description of the land in the auction of the estate of John Hutchins Jr. in November of 1934 appears to confirm that. This concludes my video on the Hutchins and related families. What happened when Lydia Lake Hutchins died in 1909 might be interesting, as her children had already signed away any right to the estate, but John Hutchins Jr. seems to have ended up living there and farming there. But the video is already overly long and complicated. Hope you enjoyed it. Some still photos and images of documents have been included after the end screen for those who want to see them or read the documentation.